Coaches, welcome to the chat, or we'll call it a hangout with myself and Dave Love. And first off, coaches, you are welcome, and I will bring up the chat box here just as we want this to be interactive. We want you to be able to ask questions. I don't want to ask the questions. I ask all the questions on the basketball podcast. I want this to be interactive with you. So Christopher's going to ask us the first question here, and that's how can we differentiate ourselves as shooting coaches if we're all teaching the same principles and fundamentals? Dave, I'll let you talk about that one first. And just before you do, coaches, if the question is specific to Dave Love, maybe put DL, and if it's specific to me, put CO, and if it doesn't matter, it's to both of us, then just don't put anything.
Awesome. So how do you differentiate yourself when we're all teaching the same things? Number one, I don't know that we are all teaching the same things. We may all be teaching dramatically different things. All of that, what you're teaching doesn't matter. How you differentiate yourself is with the results that you get. And so if you want to become a shooting coach, how I started was I called myself a shooting coach. That was the first thing I had to do. I had to tell somebody else that this is what I did, even though I hadn't done it before. And then you move up the ranks by proving that the players you work with become better. And that's the only meaningful way to set yourself apart and differentiate yourself is make players better on a consistent basis.
Yeah, I was going to say, even if you're, and we've talked about this many times, even if you're saying the same thing as someone else, we phrase it differently, different analogies, we use different ways of supporting that information or developing that information. So it, certainly in your profession, so much of it comes back to comfort with you as a coach and results, right?
Right. And I've never had a head coach or a GM in an interview process. I've never had them really ask what I teach, like what are my theories, what are my teaching points, because those vary from player to player. Everybody just wants to know, like, show me case studies, show me players you've worked with, and show me the numbers, and prove that you made a player better. And that's what I was taught early on in my career. Just hold yourself accountable to getting results. So that's my advice to coaching.
From Clinton, how many shots should high school players put up per day or per week in the off season? What is a realistic expectation for coaches?
Yeah, I don't have a number. I don't subscribe. I don't think there's anything wrong with shooting for 500 shots a day, but or 500 makes or whatever people say. I don't track shots, especially early on in the process. I don't track shots or the number of shots because I know what we're focused on is building better habits, and I don't want to give the impression to a player that getting results are the important thing early on in the process. It's not. It's improving the habit, and the results will come later. Sometimes I've had days with pros where they just play double overtime the night before. Guys are exhausted. They just go through a 90-minute practice, and then you had a whole plan for a half-hour player development session after practice, and it ends up being 10 shots, and then just go rest. So I think it's way more important to focus on what you're working on and do the best you can in that situation than set a number. The number is inconsequential to me. More is obviously better, but.
Well, in a certain extent, isn't this a turn it back on then? How many shots do you want to shoot? Because again, this has to be player led. Yeah. I mean, that's the point of all this. We can start it with extrinsic motivation, meaning you need to shoot this number of shots. But at the end of the day, the best players get better because of the intrinsic motivation, meaning they want to shoot more.
Totally. And on days and I open it up to players like, how are you feeling today? Like physically, how are you feeling? And so some days they say, hey, great. And like, can we do more? We get to the end of the workout and they ask for more. And sometimes they're like, you know what, I'm beat. Like, I'm not feeling well. I've got cold coming on. I'm tired. My body's beat down. So you get less that day. You kind of have to go on the fly.
From Coach Charlie, when teaching shooting to youth players, say 12 and under. So I consider that prepubescent.
Okay.
When is it appropriate for them to go from the small ball to the bigger ball, girls' ball to the boys' ball? And at what age should they shoot on a 10-foot?
Um, See, this one's so funny because I grew up in an area like when I'm 45 now. When I was playing when I was 12, we had 8-foot rims and small basketballs in Canada. And I thought that's how everybody did it until you get a little bit older. I didn't realize that other people in other parts of the world are shooting on 10-foot rims. So I think in my town, even though we haven't really, nobody big has come out of the town ever, and we're not really on the basketball map. I think they're doing a good job of saying, I believe it's U11. Everybody 11 years old and younger is on an 8-foot rim with a size 4 basketball, so 27.5. I think once they get to 12, they move to a 10-foot rim and a 28.5, and then the boys move up to a larger ball around high school age, but I don't know exactly the age. Those seem like good checkpoints for me. And then I don't think there's anything wrong with practicing with a different ball than you play with at a young age. Like the muscle memory is not so ingrained at that age that you can't. I shot on one hoop at the park was probably 6 inches too high, and the hoop beside it was probably a foot too low. And we bounced back and forth between the hoops, and there was no 10-foot rim anywhere. And I ended up being a pretty decent shooter. So I think we can overthink that stuff. Just get kids on an appropriate size hoop for as long as they can possibly can be.
I'll take it a step further. Those that know my stuff and know my value of variability and randomness. And for those of you that are going to come to the desert and join Dave, Love, and myself at the Art of Coaching Retreat, you'll see my backyard and you'll see my hoop. And my daughters don't know it, but intentionally the hoop is a different height every time. And we move from, say, a 27.5 to a 28.5 to a smaller ball. I don't even know how small it is. And we'll just constantly change it on them. Because again, you don't want them to get used to one thing because they want to become problem solvers. And that's part of what you're saying.
Yeah. And I agree. I think we just you figure out how to put this object at this target, whatever the object is and the target is. I think that's the skill that we're developing as much as the technical skill of shooting a basketball. Just can you figure out whatever this is and whatever that target is, make it happen. And I think that, I don't know how anyway, I'm rambling.
Yeah.
But,
Are you a gun guy or a rebounding guy? I guess another part of that doesn't matter.
Well, I wasn't initially because I didn't have the option. And then as soon as we got one at the university that I worked at, I didn't like it at first because I didn't really know how to implement it. And then moving to the NBA, you've always got multiple rebounders and passers. So I got the luxury of moving to stand anywhere I want on the floor to see whatever I want. I didn't have to be handcuffed to, I've got to rebound this or I've got to pass this, which is a really, really nice luxury. The gun now, I appreciate it. I love that I wouldn't have to chase after rebound it as often, but I don't like I'd rather a person. Like it just feels more personal. But I'll take something that helps out with the efficiency of a workout any day. How about you?
Yeah, both are valid. I mean, there's not one or the other. I mean, I prefer a person, but I don't prefer rebounding at this
Right.
point. I really don't. I find I'm much more valuable not rebounding.
Right.
You can get different perspectives on players, things that they're doing. So I try to always incorporate players as passers. I mean, that make them active participants in each other's learning, that type of concept as well that goes with that synergy of working together. But I'm all for anything that increases the number of reps a player will do, and
Right.
especially on their own. So the
Yeah.
machine to me is amazing because players can lead themselves without me there and get a ton of shots or a ton of reps.
And then when a player has an individual, like they're just getting shots up, I'm not there, they're getting shots up on the gun or Dr. Dish or whatever the product is. The one thing that I really try to encourage is even your stationary shots, be moving. Like even like don't stand and repeat over and over and over again. Just even a 1 or 2 step drift on every shot, or lift on every shot. Just like create some kind of variability in it to just make it a little more realistic.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because I think, again, a lot of coaches sometimes think what I'm saying is wacky. But what I really mean in shooting reps is just, look, sometimes you dance, sometimes you split step, like sometimes you hip turn, just some different, as you said, variability, but you can still be in stationary spot, but you're not catching it with your feet planted. You're not catching it the same way over and over again. You have to do some type of movement skill prior to the catch, which is different. That enhances variability and hopefully leads to retention. How many teaching points do you give a player to start with when just starting with?
Oh man, how many teaching points? I mean,
Sure, there's not one number. That's the first thing. There's not one number.
Yeah, in my head, I try and limit myself to 3. I like lists of 3, assuming they've got a bunch of time to go through it. Like, and I'll start to repeat them over and over and over again with a player. Like, they catch the ball, set your feet, try to wrist bent back, lift your elbow, and set your feet. Wrist bent back, lift your elbow, and I try and be so monotonous with the way I say it for 15 or so reps that it almost is a song that's stuck in their head. So 3 is sort of 3 is the maximum. Ideally, I want to really narrow it down to the 1 and get the one that matters the most. Focus on that. Give as much attention as we can to that particular habit. And but at the same time, sometimes you have to explain everything sometimes. So I can't give you an answer, but those are kind of my thought process. Now, I can't see you any longer, Chris. I can see, it says Dan's iPhone. Did I do something?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, no, you're back. Hi.
All right. One thing I was going to just add to that is just about that is like, start with short. Don't start with long. Right?
Really?
Don't start with a number. Like, don't start with anything in your mind. Start with 1, and then decide if you need 2 or 3 or 4, rather than start with 5, because you can't go back. And I would say start brief and then go longer if you need it.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I don't disagree with that.
Do you have any specific exercises for coaches to get better at it, identifying different parts of a player's shot that needs to be?
Different exercises for identifying player shots and their weaknesses?
Well, basically, do you have any exercises that you go through, or any exercises that you can use to help identify weaknesses?
Get as close to as many shooters from as many different angles as you can. Like, it's all just reps. Like, I think I'm pretty good at seeing small details in shots, and now recognizing patterns that when I see that kind of follow through, I can just see that. I can turn around as they're following through, see that, and know the 2 or 3 things that happened before that point that led them to finish there. And it all just comes from reps. So see as many players as you possibly can. Watch. Exercises, though. Just thinking off the top of my head, like, if you have video, just watch the last second. See if you can just see that last fraction of a second, and then, okay, what would have caused that? I tend to, I look like a weirdo at times, I'm sure, because I'll see a player, and then I'll just kind of close my eyes and make the motion that I see them making, and just see if I can, what do I feel they might be feeling, and see if I can kind of recreate and see what do I notice when I do that. That would probably be the one exercise that that I would go through. Like try mimic it and see what you feel.
Well, for coaches curious about looking into this more, if you look up sports pedagogy or sports coaching, it's called an observation plan. And I'm assuming Dave, like myself, would develop this through experience and repetition. I mean, there are some general points to this, which is again not observe all from the same spot all the time, all these different things. But observation plans, there's tons of good literature and research out there on.
Yeah, and challenge yourself. I was just talking with the coach today about my growth and progression as a coach. And for the first probably 3 years, I worked with the university team here. I was very foot focused. I thought the feet were the most important part of the shot. And then in talking with my mentor a couple of times over one summer, he kept talking about the hand. And I thought, I don't understand this well enough. I got to focus more on that. For that summer, I really tried to focus on just challenging myself to understand what happens with the ball leaving the hand, how the hands relate more. And to your point, one of the biggest parts that helped with that was standing in a different spot on the floor during the workouts, starting to stand behind players as opposed to in front of them all the time.
Coaches, if you're just joining us, you can post any questions in the chat box. You can send it privately or to everyone, but please put your questions down. We'll try and get to all of them and make it as useful as possible for you beyond obviously general information if it wasn't a question. And we want to get to that. And inevitable question is the guide hand and trying to move a prepubescent shooter from a two-hand to a one-handed shot.
Just that broad right now, just how do we do this?
Yeah.
That at that age, that's when I would start the process. Before like 12 would be when I'd start to really give it some serious attention. I might be planting seeds before that and doing little tiny drills here and there, but it wouldn't be the focus by any means because I don't think an 11-year-old is strong enough to be able to do this well. So once we get into that 12, 13-year-old range, that's when I would start to focus on it more. The first thing that we have to do is we have to get the shooting hand in the right position. Most of the time we push with our non-shooting hand because the shooting hand is over there, which is a byproduct of we used to be 8 years old and do this. And slowly it changed, but it didn't get fully under the ball. We're pushing the ball offline that way, thumbing it back that direction. So first you got to attack the shooting hand, and that's something I go into a lot of detail on in my online workout program, 7 days to better guide hand. It just focuses on guide hand, shooting hand, and the full release. But understand that they work together. Like that's the big part.
My daughters right now, maybe I'm wrong, but all I'm focused on is them being able to bring the ball up through their body without turning their hips or their shoulders.
Right. Okay, great.
I honestly couldn't care right now if they two-hand or one-hand or anything like that.
And how old are your oldest?
6 and 8.
6 and 8. Yeah, I focus on like in that 10 and below range, wide feet, stable feet, and then trying to start to limit that rotational energy that they want to create, as you mentioned, and so yeah, it's very similar ideas on that.
My oldest will explain the differences between her. She knows it and she can explain it. And she even came up with a fourth one I don't use, which is a funny one in her mind. So she'll share it with you when you meet them. May 8th and 10th at the Art of Coaching with Dave and Chris down here in Palm Desert. So can't wait for that, Coach.
I'm going to have such a sunburn. It's going to be
bad. Don't worry. We'll get you out hiking early. Continuing, Michael asks, how do you keep players from continuing with the good habits you're teaching in between sessions? You teach them something and then they go away and then they come back. If I could start with that.
Yeah, please.
There's no answer other than they have to continue with it on their own. Like it just does not happen. And this is the problem, Michael, that you and I and all of us face as coaches, is that right now a player comes to practice, the only time they spend learning or doing reps is at practice. If they don't lead themselves on their own and do it on their own, it's going to be very hard to lead to retention and to get enough repetition to, as you said, retain this habit. Anything to add to that?
No, not really. That's exactly the direction I was going to go. That really, I'm in sales, where I'm trying to teach them to become their own shooting coach. Like, why does this matter? How I would do it, what I'm looking for in these drills, and then just selling them on, this is on you. Me, and the line I always start with is, me saying this does not build the habit at all. You now have to understand what I've said, take it to heart, and you have to do it. Because me just, hey, the using words did not cause you to move your body in a different way at all.
I love the phrasing of that. And anyone that's part of Basketball Immersion in our community knows learn by doing. You learn by doing. So they have to do. They have to do. We can create the environment and we can help them with some, certainly some communication and some information that they've got to do in terms of that. So Dave and I have talked about this, so I know his answer somewhat, and I have an answer to this as well. And I think Gannon Baker on the most recent basketball podcast alluded to this as well. So you'll like this one, Dave. Why does it appear that Dave Love is reluctant to mention his NBA clients when he sends out his emails, et cetera, et cetera? It seems to this coach that it would add credibility to what you say, which is a fair point, right? It would add credibility to what you say.
Yep.
But go.
I battle with this all the time because I've gone from working with the team to working independently. I maybe go back to a team at some point. I don't know what the future is going to hold, but for right now, I'm independent, and everybody who's independent is talking about their players. So it's sort of expected. But
not everyone. Let's not generalize. Not everyone. There are some that don't too.
Yeah. Correct. Thank you. The reason I don't is the most important relationships that I have are with those players. And I never want to leverage that relationship for my own gain. If I get anything personally out of that relationship, it will be because the player got better and they gave me credit. I'm not going to try and take credit. So I never want a player to feel like I've used them for my gain. And so I leave out names. And if a player gives me credit, then fantastic. I'm thrilled with that. But I try and avoid doing anything that will ask for it or imply it.
It's noble of you. It's bad business.
Yeah.
But it is. And that's, all of us face that. I don't tell you who my NBA coaches I've worked with. I don't tell you who my Division I coaches I've worked with are, or who from the NBA or the NCAA are members of Basketball Immersion. There's tons of them, but I don't do that either. And it's, bad business.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff. Hey, Jeff, that's awesome. I agree with that. And again, it's not to say the other people are wrong. Right, they're building their business, how they want to build their business. But
you have to decide what your business is. And as much as I am selling product online and trying to teach online, right now the focus of my business is my NBA guys. And I had a phone call with an NBA GM, and he went so far as to say, like, we avoid those guys on social media. And so in that moment, it served me. It's bad business, as you say, and I agree with you. But in that moment, for what my business really is, it was good business. And I know you kind of agree with that based on like how private you are with some of your information as well. And ultimately, if you're only interested in learning from me because I list off this player, and this player, if that's the only reason, then I don't want you as a client. If I need to dazzle you by mentioning other people's names and you can't just go by my body of work, then I'm fine with not having that person involved in what I do.
Uh, Coach Chris here has a question, which is advice on, and directed this towards me, but Dave will certainly get your opinion too. Any advice or tips on being a head coach for an elementary school team? First of all, awesome. Congratulations. Being a coach, being in service of the game, being in service of young people, I congratulate all of you, and I hope that comes across that I have such a passion for coaches and just having these opportunities. Here's my biggest piece of advice. Dave, do you like dessert?
Yeah, of course.
Why don't we eat dessert sometimes at the beginning of the meal? It's my favorite thing, and I've always wondered, why do we follow these traditions of, okay, we're going to eat our vegetables, we're going to eat our steak, and then we're going to eat our, well, we save the best for last. I get that. But hey, how about sometimes start with dessert and end with dessert? Because to me, those are the two best things, and that would make the meal better. That's my advice to coaches when they're coaching young people, is to keep in mind that they like dessert.
Right.
Dave, what's dessert in a basketball coaching setting? Playing the game.
Right.
How to play the game.
And that's honestly, that's something I'm horrible at. And that I had a coach I worked with in Cleveland who used that exact expression, like, now we're going to have dessert. And it was always finishing a workout with something fun. And I've tried to incorporate that, and maybe I need to think about having a little dessert before we eat. But I like it.
Youth development, we want to retain them in sport. We want
Yes.
to increase their enjoyment of the sport, and we want to increase their enjoyment of playing the game. That means help them get as skilled as possible at playing the game. And I'm not saying 5-on-5. This could be 2-on-2, 3-on-3, small-sided games, but playing the game. Look, you can do fundamentals all you want, but they got to enjoy playing the game. And we can get into this conversation later if people want, but that's such a key part of it.
And to piggyback on that, Chris, I think like that's even more important for girls. Girls don't play enough in general. I'm making a vast generalization. Boys probably play too much and don't get enough like skill stuff, where girls probably don't play enough at a young age. They're not organizing 3-on-3 games at the playground the way that boys typically do. And I think that is changing. But if I can make a vast generalization, especially with girls, play as much as you possibly can. The most nervous I've ever been coaching in the last 5 years was I had to take over my then 9-year-old daughter's practice because their regular coach wasn't able to be there that day. And the entire practice, all I could think was, you can't be the reason these girls quit. Do not be the reason they quit. Your only goal is to make sure they want to come back to practice next week. And
then coming back to this other one is to give them homework in between practices, to check for retention, check for transfer, but even to check for motivation. Hey, who can go 3 times between their legs the best? Okay, we're going to have a little competition next practice to see who can do it the best. The ones that work on it will be the best ones at it. And that's creating an environment where they want to get better and they see themselves improving. And that's such a huge part of this as well. So I love that. What kind of things would you do to help someone extend their range?
that's a tough one. If my smart ass answer is I'd help them get taller and older and stronger. And all I mean by that is we have to understand that all those things take time. So extending range is going to take time as well. And then for the player who should be old enough, strong enough to shoot with more range than they have, usually it's a synchronization issue. Usually they're not there. I think most commonly they're extending their lower body. That power is gone, and then they begin to use their upper body, and that those two things aren't happening in conjunction with each other, with more power being flowed. So that would be what I would focus on, just making sure they're synchronized better.
I think you nailed it, because I think most of that comes back to again, physical maturity. But beyond that, it's just that kinetic chain is the technical word of, summation of joint forces, that your body flows from largest to smallest muscles. And there's no pause in that kinetic chain, and there's no pause in that summation of joint forces, if you want to search the biomechanic terms.
And then the last part of it is understand, why do we want to? Like, I've got a ton of kids who like, I want to extend my range. Great. Where can you shoot from now? I can shoot from the 3-point line. I want to be able to shoot from the logo. Why? Well, because Trey does it, and Steph does it. Well, okay, great. You just listed the 2 people in the world that's actually, and Dame, 3 people in the world that's actually a good shot for. For the rest of it, that's probably not a valuable shot. So,
although I do think, Coach, that this is going to become more and more important as the game has obviously moved to the 3-point shot and the value of the 3-point shot at all levels, that it's going to be more towards that. And I always did something with my players too, that we tried to ignore the line as they got better as shooters. So once they could shoot the 3-point line, we would ignore the line and say, shoot from where you are. Don't worry about the line. And that's kind of a concept that we would do. We would move them inside, outside, so that they quit thinking about the 3-point line. Because almost it's like a mental barrier as well.
Right, absolutely. But to what degree? Like, are we talking 6 feet outside the line?
No, it's just literally we'd go inside the 3-point line, outside the 3-point line, and then one more step. So it's just kind of making sure you're always around it. And also to teach them at my level, the college level, to teach them what the worst shot in basketball was.
Right.
And what that feels like, just being on the line or just in front of it. So that was another part of it. But yeah. And by the way, both those questions were mainly relative to just expanding the range. Should you change a player's shot mid-season with fundamental flaws? And I'm sure we both get these questions, like how much should you change of individual player development within?
What's your answer?
No. I mean, in season is different. Now, it depends on the level of a player as well, which is a key part of it, right? If I'm thinking about a player's ability to enjoy the game, to impact the game, and if, as you progress in levels, it's more and more about winning, then it's a no. But if we're going to train through the year and I truly don't care about winning, which I hope is the case at a lot of levels, then it's a yes, because that's the only exposure I usually have with players as well. So if I can impact them, I want to impact them.
Yeah, and that goes in line with my answer, which would be it depends on what your goal is. If your goal is to develop this player, which it should be at 8, 10, 12 years old, then you should always be working to develop the shot, or change the shot, or improve the shot. Otherwise, it's just you're settling for your 13-year-old being as good as a 12-year-old. We need to be developing at that age. And then for older players, I would factor in, are you playing? Like, if you're a professional who's sitting on the bench, I had an agency that asked me to go work with a player in the middle of the season for the first time. I said, I don't think that's a good idea. And they said, well, he plays 2 minutes a game in blowouts, and he's end of a contract year, so time is of the essence. And so in those situations, it's kind of a case by case basis for the older players, I think. But the younger guys, to me, the answer is always, your job is developing. So develop.
Yeah. Coach Clinton kind of asked something similar to what we've asked about keeper shots. Should a younger player practice any shots when they don't have the strength? Kind of cover that. I think to have good form anymore, at least get the feel of generating more power is his point. So we might sacrifice form, but then they might understand what type of power they need to generate and the value of the form. This to me would relate to a little bit, and there's a danger to both those, but relates to the concept of hard first instruction. That initially they get a better conceptual or mental representation of what is required of them. So we make it hard first, so that then when they go back to simple, they have a better understanding of where they're going. I don't know if that applies to shooting, so I am curious as well.
Yeah, I do understand it. It for me that comes down to the percentage of the work that you do that way. So if you're going to say, hey, I'm going to help you feel this by we're going to shoot 10 shots in the morning with a medicine ball, versus we're going to spend an entire workout shooting with a medicine ball, or we're going to shoot 10 shots so that can help you feel what 35 feet feels like, versus we're going to spend the entire workout shooting from 35 feet. I have no problem with using the feel of it. Like, that's a teaching moment as opposed to building a habit. And teaching moments in whatever form they take can always be great. It just comes back to, do you know what you're working on, and do you know what you're teaching here? Are you teaching somebody to shoot from 35 feet, or are you teaching somebody how to synchronize so that they can get the ball to cover that amount, and then applying that into another situation?
We're going to keep going, coaches, but I hope you get the value of kind of hanging out with Dave and I, because we have these conversations and we just wanted to share them with you guys as well, because we do have similar thoughts, but we approach them from different perspectives. Because on one side, I'm focused somewhat on a skill development within a team setting, and whereas Dave, again, not to discount the fact that he cares what happens in the game, he does, but he does a lot more isolated one-on-one type of coaching. And the way that we can blend those and bring them together, because by and large, almost all of you as coaches don't operate in a bubble where you can do just one or the other. You have to do it all at the same time.
You were probably you're going to hate that I say this, but I don't care. You were probably the most valuable coach that I know to me personally, just because we do approach things really, really similarly at times, which lets me know, okay, even though he has a different approach, we do things similarly. And then, but there's enough, not disagreement, there's enough other ideas that it challenges me to, do I need to look at this from a different angle? Do I need to take a different perspective on this? And so I love that about you, but I don't love you. You're a pain in my butt.
Well, we've established that, but we've enjoyed it, and we'll keep going here. I'm curious about this one. Left-handers, do you think they have different mechanics? Like that's a stereotype a little bit, right? That lefties have better shot form.
I was going through this. How long ago was this?
Great question, Michael, by the way.
I started to really feel like every lefty is a little weird. Am I crazy? Like, physically, they're a little weird. And I talked to about 3 or 4 different people involved in biomechanics and physiotherapists, and finally somebody gave me an answer that really made sense to me. They said they are physically different because they've grown up left-handed in a right-handed world, and they've grown up having to make concessions for all these stupid things that we as righties do without thinking about it. They have to do differently just to get by. We write like this as right-handers. They have to write like this. We just open a door here. They have to open a door like that. That all these weird, strange things that as a righty I don't even think about, that they go, oh yeah, have you ever tried to open a can with a can opener as a lefty? Like, it's a disaster. So they grow up constantly having to make this kind of a movement, and I forget which muscle underdevelops, but it does. And I had a lefty this past summer that I was working with a bunch, and a bunch of our workout was, okay, stand and just relax here, relax. Don't do that. This doesn't help you get, that's a left-handed move. See if you can be here. And so I do believe that lefties are built a little bit differently.
Which my 8-year-old daughter's a lefty, and I can see it already. I can see
Yeah.
it already in terms of how she's interacting with the ball and how she's interacting with her shot and different things. There's just a difference to it all. And if anything, she feels more comfortable on her right side with a lot of things, which I know is a thing that we want to retain, but then we
Right.
want to get her to obviously comfort with everything else. So it's fascinating. Yeah, I could make a whole webinar based on my daughter. It's the fascination. What kind of things do you have for a 3-point contest to help develop young players to make 10 to 15 in a row some days, then other days, can't make any? I don't know if it's a contest, but what are your thoughts on that? Coach
First,
Ray, by the way, thanks for the question.
first, don't you can understand you can practice free throws inside the free throw line, and you can practice 3-point shots inside the 3-point line. That you don't have to practice at that line to get better at that skill. So when I find that a player is that erratic and that inconsistent, there's usually a physical reason why. And so I try and avoid trying to rebuild a habit in that really difficult environment of 20 feet or 22 feet, or whatever it is. And I'll move it back in as much as I need to. And I'll practice baseline drift from 12 feet out. And as they get better at the skill that was holding them back, then we're working towards applying that at the 3-point line. So if they're really that erratic, hopefully you can identify the micro skill that they struggle with that is causing the inconsistency, move in, tackle that, then start to apply it closer to the 3-point line as they get better at the micro skill.
Totally agree. And then the other part to that might be, what are they doing when they're making 10 to 15 in a row? Is it blocked? Is it from the same spot over and over again? That type of situation. And I might consider, again, BDT or some basketball decision training, not familiar with it, and doing something a little bit more randomized and on a consistent basis so they get used to the inconsistencies. Because the only way to get more consistent is to become consciously and then unconsciously aware of that you're actually missing for this reason. And that's what I say to, again, I keep coming back to my daughter. I just, I can't correct it. Feel it. Feel it. What do you feel when you make it? What do you feel when you don't make it? What's the difference in that process?
And I love that you said, like, don't be afraid to make it ugly. That we shouldn't be shooting for 15 out of 15. That's not real. That's never going. Not never. Hopefully that happens in a game, but it's probably not going to. We should be shooting for, like, just that game situation where it's going to be ugly at times, and then just figure out, do your best. And that's where, I'm really trying to make strides myself as a coach.
Beyond technique, coping is the number one strategy, right? Coping with misses,
Right.
that type of thing. Which video series of Dave's should be first watched? I love that question, Coach Shane.
It depends on the age of the player. If the player is under 12 years old, I would start with 7 Days to Better Balance. If they are over 12, I would start with 7 Days to a Better Guide Hand. And then if it's really specific, like if you know their arc is terrible and they're sort of over that 12-year-old range, then maybe start with that. But balance for the younger players, guide hand for the older players.
And you have videos of that on. But you, again, Coach, I've been posting links throughout here. So for Dave's newsletter, my newsletter, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, etc. So go back through the chat, coaches, and click on those links if you're not already part of those, and you'll be able to get access to a lot of those different series and stuff that Dave shares or I share. And again, most of those are free. So that's great in terms of that. That's a good question. Coach Derek, this is probably for both of us. Which one are 2 staples in your program that you emphasize every day at practice? Let me start with that, and I will say effort, which is defined by your non-negotiables, and the second is obviously my wheelhouse, decision making, and all of that is overridden by making sure that my players connect, transfer, and retain every day. So we play the game as much as possible every day in practice. But your non-negotiables, like when people say effort, oh, I want my players to work hard. Here's the hard part is, how do you define that? Like if you're just saying that word, that's great, but what does it really mean? So define that for your players. We have certain things that are non-negotiables, running hard to a corner on offense, being present on the defensive boards, different things like that, where our players know that's how we gauge whether effort is there or not. So have some non-negotiables where they understand. And then
Well, what are some of your others? You mentioned 2. What are you willing? You're the sharing guru. Of course, you're willing to share. Share some others.
Presence on the defensive boards, running a wing hard is essentially to the spot. In terms of that, sprinting out of a roll, in terms of a player setting a screen, a defensive player being in a stance. I think there's a certain presence or confidence comes from seeing yourself below the player you're covering,
Right.
so being in a stance. So these are just, again, things that we can say immediately. If I see a player in practice and they're standing above the player they're covering, then we can say to them, hey, listen, this is an effort and here's why we define it for them. Instead of just saying, hey, you're not working hard, which is just generalization that, again, it doesn't give them any specific learning, different things that go with that. And then the other one on defense is the ability to be able to be a boxer, foot fire, whatever you want to call it, where your feet are constantly in motion. There's very few times on defense where your feet are stationary. So if you're standing stationary, feet planted in the ground, then that would be another thing that we can call someone out on. Say, this is not effort based on how we define it.
That's a really small, hard skill to learn. Don't you or have you experienced that? Like I try and teach.
They're all incredibly hard. They're all incredibly hard.
The analogy that I use, there was a fantastic book. It was about baseball, and the name is going to escape me for a second. It might come to me as I'm describing it, where they had Cal Ripken Jr. talking about, he did a section of the first section of the book on fielding in the infield. They had Greg Maddux writing about pitching. They had Tony Gwynn, right? I'm dating myself with how a lot of people
very much
these guys are, but Tony Gwynn talking about hitting, and I forget what. Oh, is Tommy Lasorda talking about managing? And the one part I remember from that I apply all the time in basketball from Cal Ripken was he always tried to be in the air the moment contact would be made with the batted ball. That he was always trying to just kind of hop and engage his body so he's in the air when contact is being made so that he could be landing and then adjusting as soon as he's made the decision where the ball is, or made recognition where the ball is and where it's going. And like that's basically ball in the air, feet in the air for us basketball players. And I find that sometimes at a young age that gets really hard for players at college age. I just observed a workout where a college girl was working on that very same thing and really struggling with it. Do you find players?
No, I would agree with all that. It's the subtleties of offense and defense that are the most challenging to learn, but the most important separators for players from being good to great.
Right.
And that's exactly it. And I would phrase it to players at all levels and say, hey, listen, you're good at this. You want to be great at this. Here's where we need to. And I think it's okay to tell them good is okay. Yeah. Here's what great looks like, and here's what great feels like.
I've started seeing in clinics, which most of the kids end up being 11 to 15 years old at a lot of the clinics that I run. I've started saying, and I enjoy saying, you're good at big things. You're horrible at details. Yeah. And you want to get good at this game, you're going to have to start to get good at some of these details. If I look at you from across the court, you look like shooters. I take video of you in slow motion. You don't look like shooters anymore. And that's so. Going back to just that detail, how would you handle just a player who can't get their feet in the air and land as the ball hits their hands?
So this comes back to, and I know this question was asked, Coach Michael asked, what is your approach to teaching a skill? And he asked for some recommendations, stuff like that, and we'll get to it. But this builds into that a little bit. So good. So teaching a skill, I mean, this is more complex than we have time for. But essentially in that example, the number one thing is you have to correct every mistake. So what's a non-negotiable for you in terms of them doing this skill, and then I correct it every time they do it wrong? Now, if they do it wrong 9 out of 10 times, I am correcting it 9 out of 10 times. But as they get better at it, what you'll notice is I correct it less, to the point that if they only make, say, 2 or 3 mistakes out of 10, I might not correct those at all, because now they've got it. They can error detect and error correct on their own. And coaches all the way through the season will be correcting the same thing and constantly correcting. And then players never get a chance on their own to be able to become error detectors, error correctors. So it's that gradual reduction and correction as they get better at it that becomes most important. And then the other part that goes with that is noticing when they do it right. Because coaches are really good at telling people when they do it wrong. It's this concept of noticing when they do it right. So those are the two kind of things that I come back to about teaching a skill. Teaching a skill, like I can give you the details of the skill, I can give you a drill. That's not hard. The hard part is obviously to notice when they're doing it wrong and notice when they're doing it right.
Right.
And then balancing that.
And this is where you again have been so important in my development as a coach, where like I wonder, am I doing things in a logical way? To me it's logical, but maybe it's not. And my process that I follow is almost identical. Like I'll slow it down as much as I need to for you to correct this habit and hold you accountable to every single time. And the second the ball is leaving your hand, I'm giving you oh good, yeah, oh yes. That, like, so you immediately have feedback on, oh, that was all right. That was fine. We're getting better. Like, we'll keep working. Ooh, I really like that one. And the better it is, I try and overdo it a little bit and like just get really excited that this is boring for players. It's sometimes humiliating. They're being vulnerable with you. And sometimes I just try and be really goofy and super excited for them when they start to get things right. And most of the time it's genuine. Like, but
yeah, you have to normalize mistakes. You have to normalize errors. You have to normalize misses. That's all part of it. It's normal. Like I say to kids all the time, and this is separate and related, is that I will tell kids all the time, I am sad, I am depressed, I am lonely, I am all those things because I am human.
right.
I go through those same emotions that you go through. What I have taught myself through gratitude and the practice of different things that I've learned in coping strategies is how to either manage or get out of those states. That's what sport is. It's like managing those states and getting out of those states. But also, the first part of that process is normalizing, understanding that these things are all normal. I missed once. That's my go-to line all the time with kids when they get frustrated. I missed once. I'm like, it happens. Move on. I missed once. Yeah. So
Every NBA player I've worked with has airballed a shot from like the dots, like 2 steps inside the free throw line. Every NBA player has airballed a shot from there. Airball.
Great modeling, by the way, when you watch NBA players miss badly in games, how they handle it. Like it doesn't, for the most part, they don't look embarrassed. They don't laugh. There's nothing other than next play.
Yeah, and then when that happens with a youth player, I go and I grab the rebound, I give it back to them, and I try and poker face it.
Next play.
And come back to it like two shots later. I'm like, remember that shot that you airballed? Remember my reaction? What was my reaction? You didn't react. Why not? Because it was no big deal. Like, who cares?
Normalize it. That's great. And then the other part, Michael, you just asked about some recommendations about how to teach skills, etc. I would say basketballimmersion.com, because I'm biased. If you're not a member, become a member, because I can certainly share what to teach, but most of my stuff is how to teach. It's how to teach. Focused on that so much. But the other person for everyone, if you don't follow him or read his stuff, Doug Lemoff, and I'll put a link here, a tremendous teacher, teach like a champion, just tremendous stuff. And, so much transferable to sports, and he's doing a lot of stuff on sports too. But most of his stuff was developed through the classroom. And Dave, that's where I find coaches have missed the boat, is they don't treat the basketball practice like a classroom. So they skip so many things that are important in the classroom.
I read Doug's book. It's I can't remember if it's Perfect Practice or Practice Perfect.
Yeah.
And read it going, oh my gosh, that's like, and a lot of my terminology now comes from realizing I was doing that. I just didn't know that I was doing that. Like he talks about isolating a skill and then layer it. And that's where all my terminology came from that book, just going, oh, now I know what to call this. I'm isolating a skill. I'm isolating a habit. I'm adding layers. It's a dry book, but it's probably one of the most important books I've read.
Tremendous blogs, everything. And for me, what Basketball Immersion has done for a lot of coaches that probably already use some of my ideas or some of these ideas that have been evidence-based research going back 40, 50 years, it's just given them credibility. And that's kind of what Doug's stuff did too, is like the phrasing, the way he says it, I'm going, okay, I believe that. Now he gave me credibility to it. And that's what's been so important as well. So we have 2 more questions.
Okay, I have 2 more minutes. Rapid fire round. Here we go.
Yeah. What are shooting fundamentals you're absolutely doing every day in practice? Team shooting.
I do form shooting every day and you'll see the same 3 drills with every player, but each player will have a different focus depending on what their habits are, because I just find these 3 drills are a good catch-all for a lot of habits. So form shooting, and just trying to fight for your balance, trying to fight for, I think you say fight for your feet. Is that how you phrase it? Yeah, fight for your balancing, fight to keep your shot simple every situation that you're in.
Love it. And for me, 2 balls, 3 shooters, you can look it up on our YouTube page. 2 balls, 3 shooters is an everyday shooting drill for our team, where I can pull a player aside if I need to while there's shooting going on, we're getting mass reps, and then basketball decision training. And there's variations of basketball decision training. Sometimes it's just hands up, hands down, stationary on a spot, and then sometimes it's moving and more dynamic. But those 2 things really, again, create some synergy with that. So when you first started coaching in the off season, when you first started coaching, what in the off season helped you improve the most in basketball?
So you cut out there for a second. What helped you?
Sorry. I'm getting excited because we've shared so much and it's almost over. When you first started coaching, what in the off season helped you to improve the most as a basketball coach?
Working with players. Like, just work with every player that you possibly can. Like, I get asked all the time on social media, how do I start as a trainer, as a skills coach, as a shooting coach? Work with players. Like, you learn more from them than you teach them. And like my season is the off season. So that's when I'm working the most, is in the off season to develop new skills. So the more players you can work with, the better. And it doesn't matter what level they're at, because I've had 12-year-olds that taught me something about the university player. Like, I could see university player X made this move and I knew I didn't like it, but I couldn't figure out exactly what I didn't like about it. And then I worked with the 12-year-old and I could see it with him. And the 12-year-old helped me with the college player. And you just, every player will put a new tool in your tool belt. So work with as many as you can.
My main thing is go watch practice, go watch workouts, go spend time with coaches. Don Showalter, I recorded a podcast with him recently that'll come up in the future here. But we talked about this, that basketball camps are different. You used to be able to travel to basketball camps, work camps, no issues. NCAA changed a bunch of rules, harder to work camps now. So there's not this one-on-one interactions anymore where you get to just, Dave doesn't agree with me, I don't agree with him, and then we get to have a conversation about it. And that just doesn't happen enough. So go to practices, engage people in conversation, ask questions, stimulate your thinking. Join basketballimmersion.com. Obviously join Dave Love's newsletter and then get some workouts. And most importantly, come join us in the desert, May 8th to 10th, Palm Desert, California, Art of Coaching with Dave and Chris. Basically, we'll do this live. We'll be on the court and we'll answer any and all questions.
I think the on-court stuff is going to be so valuable, but I think it's the moments away from the court. Like, we plan on spending breakfast, lunch, dinner, after dinner with all of the people who attend. And you said we have all levels of coaches attending. We've got some professional
all levels.
Coaches. So that the networking opportunities, I think, are the hidden gem in there that I'm super excited. Like, you develop these meaningful connections, and you're no longer just a Twitter handle anymore to these people. You have a connection with these guys, and they know your name when you say, "Hey, coach, it's me, so and so." Like that's what I'm fired up about.
Network and knowledge is how we refer to this. Network and knowledge is you have this opportunity to build not just your knowledge, but your network as well. And those things are an important part of this. And yeah, no, I'm pretty pumped about the level of coaches that are attending and are interested in attending as well. So we still have spots. Contact me just for you that are on this. I have two things. One, I have a bonus that Dave Love hasn't shared recently, and I'll share this bonus in the link here in the chat box. And I find it. And then the other thing is, if you're interested in the art of coaching with Dave Love, that retreat, then contact me, send me an email, and we will honor a special for coaches that are on this webinar with us, or whatever we're calling it, hangout, that will honor the early bird pricing as well in terms of that. But we'll have a great Dave, anything to talk about with the 9 myths of training that I'm just sharing now as a bonus for those that stayed on the chat with us?
Yeah, just they basically come down to create energy at the target to get the ball to go at the target, and fight to keep things simple. That everything that I work on is sort of in line with those 2 ideas. And the more you can do those, the more repeatable and online your shot will be. Like shooting's not
Coaches,
rock.
thank you for your feedback. I appreciate some of you in the chat giving us a shout out. If you could do that on social media, especially on Twitter, give Dave and I a shout out, just saying you enjoyed this. If you think this would be valuable for us to do it again for you, we're considering doing some different things like this where we can impact you more directly and add even more value to what you do. And thank you for all you do as well for players and service of the
And Chris, thank you for all your work to share on the big scale, but even just organizing this. And I appreciate you. You're good dependent, despite all those other things I say via nasty text messages.
All good. All good. Besties forever. All right. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, bud.